Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's your boy Jamsys, and I'm back again with some tier list content or whatever. So we're getting an ML5 selector soon, if you haven't heard. And so a few people have been asking me about opinions of what they should pick or like advice, so I'm here to provide that content. Just a disclaimer before I get in, this is going to be RTA only. We're not really looking at like PvE or AI Arena. A lot of the units are transferable from RTA to AI Arena anyway, so not going to get too deep into other applications. So there's strictly going to be RTA, and I do want to say that you should make an informed decision. This tier list is a tool, not really a rule. So make informed decisions, because I don't really know the state of your account, and if you really want to pick a unit because you think they look nice, you should go for it, because enjoyment is the most important part of not getting burnt out of a game. Anyway, if you like this style of content, like, subscribe, leave a comment, blah blah blah, you know, the basic YouTube show stuff. But yeah, before we get into it, I'm gonna explain the tiers. The must-have tier is basically like the meta-defining units that you should definitely have. They're always a pretty decent pick despite the number of counters that exist to them and continue to come out for them. The meta units are basically like the very spammable units. You'll see these units in a draft all the time. It's never a bad pickup to have units in this tier because they help round out a draft. The meta asterisks are basically kind of the UU of the meta tier, where they're definitely pickable and they're definitely good. They're just not for every game. And there's a few considerations you have to make before picking them. Above average is basically where most of the ML5s are, where they're like very pickable, very usable, but maybe not every game, maybe like every 5 or 10 games. So they're definitely good to have on your account, but they don't take precedence over the previous units on the tier list. Mid stands for mediocre, and the units here are just mediocre, you know? Like, they have a niche, but they don't really fill it that well, or the niche is too specific, or maybe other units just outperform them, and they kind of get dumpstered in this tier. The next tier is basically the last tier of the tier list, which is unusable, where these units, they don't really have a niche, or their niche is too hard to meet, or they're just very clunky. Like, a lot of old units go here, unsurprisingly, and the last tier is too new, where basically the last 3 ML5s that came out of these 2 creatures and Urban Shadow Shoe just can't be picked by the selector, unfortunately. So they don't really get rated on this tier list. But yeah, let's get into it. A Taiwan belongs solidly in the meta tier. He is a very strong mitigation knight, where he provides offensive pressure with death breaks and stuns, but he also has like a lot of like out of turn value thanks to his cleanse, and the fact that his death break and stun can ignore ER, even better, especially if the opponent's team does not have any immunity to actively shield yourself from A Taiwan. APOC unfortunately goes into the above average tier. SG has been trying really hard to nerf her in the meta due to how oppressive she was in the previous seasons. The HP scaling frenzy hurts her. The release of other units or buffs of other units really hurts her. It is what it is. She's still very pickable, but she has fallen from grace quite a bit. RB enters our list as her first unusable unit, which is kind of sad to say, because he used to be like such a dominant unit in the meta, but he's just outclassed in every way. His blind isn't that important. It actively harms him in some matchups. His AoE attack doesn't even do that much damage. His revive is easily counterable or workaroundable. You'll see a few people use him as an anti-cleave tech on like counter Moonlight Dreamblade, but I think that's a little too copium. Archdemon Shadow, or you know, what I colloquially call her as, is the beta version of Navy Captain Landy, basically. She's just mid. She definitely is still pickable, as Steel is very strong, but she's kind of just like a worse version of Navy Captain Landy in like every way. She's less bulky, she is less of a win condition. Her S3 is strong, but like, come on. Navy Captain Landy S3 just one-shots the entire team, while Archdemon has to pray that she doesn't get 15%ed on the death break and burns. Definitely pickable, but not as strong as she used to be. Architect Leica belongs in the meta asterisk tier. She would belong in the meta tier, but with the release of new units such as Abyssal Yafine and the introduction of a lot of disruption in the meta, she isn't as prevalent as she used to be. She's still a solid pickup for the 4-5 slam position, where it's a force span if the opponent has no mitigation, but you know, nothing too special, nothing too special. Astromancer Elena is slightly better in the mid position, but she does have a very, very specific and specialized niche of being picked in cleave to counter certain compositions. But, you know, she doesn't, there's a few limitations to her. Like, she doesn't do that much damage. She has to be picked with an AoE. That kind of like hinders her. She has a non-attack skill, which is not always the best thing because it means you're going to eat like a politics counter or something. So yeah, she's solidly usable, but not the most usable unit. Bellion belongs in the above average tier. A lot of people pre-ban her because she denies books, but in practice, you will see that she does have a lot of counters, especially if you are not playing against like a cleave-focused matchup. She does have like unparalleled utility in, you know, removing books, but it just doesn't make her better than other units on this list. Oh, Blood Moon Haste, rip. Another unusable unit, just doesn't really have a niche. Like, anti-revive is cool and all, but he doesn't really prevent it, and there's units that do it better. Briarwitch Iceria, I'm actually gonna put in the must-have tier. She was broken ever since her buff, and a lot of the meta revolves around either pre-banning her or dealing with her in drafts because she has the ability to single-handedly tear through teams with their ignore ER Soulburn, and while she does have counters, they all have workarounds, which are not that great. Like, you don't have to press Briceria S3. Like, I can't stress this enough. Like, Briceria counters are all like not 100% unless if you're cleaving her, but that again is not reliable because this unit is just too flexible. She blocks revive simply by existing. She has the potential to tear through teams if you have book, defense break, and unbuffable are really good. The whole deal. I'm gonna put Closer Charles in the mid tier just because Closer Charles, while a decent unit, he kind of requires a level of speed gear most people are not willing to invest into their Closer Charles, and he's just really hindered by his lack of base speed basically in this meta where you have a bunch of openers that are like 120 base speed or faster. He just really can't compete. Commander Pavel goes in the above average tier. I think he does have a place in Cleaver's drafts as a 4-5 to finish out the draft, but he's not super common, and sometimes you'll find that Commander Pavel doesn't have enough damage to break through a team unless you have like a Death Break, which is not reliable. So he's solidly pickable, but only in the above average tier. So we have the best unit in the game here at Conquerilius. It's been like this for however long since she came out. But even with a billion counters in the meta for her in the form of like Zeo, Bunny Dom, whatever, she's still the most oppressive unit just because of the insane value she provides. If you did not pick her up from the Moonlight connections, I would heavily recommend you do so. Dark Corvus is another unit that belongs in the meta asterisk section, where if you pick him as a 4-5 against the correct team, he is a must ban or he will solo your team. And he is very good, especially in these slower metas where teams are low damage and high bulk. Dark Corvus tears them apart. DDR, I'm gonna speculate post DDR buff for this, and I'm gonna put him in the meta asterisk tier. The fact that you can actually strip and put people to sleep turn 1 and then push your team up is incredibly broken. He's also a evasion counter now, so you can't early pick Aiden through the threat of DDR, especially since units that are asleep cannot be, like, you can't miscrit on a sleep unit. So this is an Aiden counter, so he's definitely going to be a pretty good meta unit, but I'm going to put him conservatively in the meta asterisk tier because I do think that some other units will definitely have some counter play. Like if you cleave him and play really aggressively into him, I think he's still gonna be really weak into that. I'm gonna put DJB and FCC as a combo in the above average tier. This style, or Faintless as it's commonly referred to, is still pretty good, but you know, there's a few better limitations, a few better combos in the meta, and they are a few limitations for this style of play, such as like Ran Zeo Cleave is actually pretty good into it. So they go into this above average tier where they do have a niche and they're like very pickable, but maybe not every game. Designer a little bit is probably at the top of the mid tier. She is decent as a solo carry against debuff heavy teams, but especially with Jacko, she just does not win that matchup. And a lot of people don't opt to go for like full control matchups anyway nowadays, so she's just like kind of mid. You could do better. Flitica is solidly in the middle of the meta Asterisk tier. She's a safe guiding light unit with a lot of tempo, but she's really weak to getting outsped, and she has a few matchups where she doesn't provide enough tempo. So against like really hard tank down, you'll find that Flit doesn't have that much value, because like those type of teams don't really care if one unit has a full reset, because they plan to play the attrition game anyway. So she's kind of bad into those teams, but yeah, she's still a solid pickup overall. Judge Kize, another unusable unit. This unit needs to decide whether it wants to be a DPS or it wants to be a debuffer, and then get a complete rework after that, basically. LRK, top unit in the meta tier. He's basically a mitigation knight that also provides immunity, that is also a DPS for some reason. So pretty good. And he's pretty good at, you know, providing reach for Stenny or Landy, which is why I don't see them super often anymore. Well, Landy anyway, Stenny still, you know, everywhere. Lionheart goes in the meta tier. She's still very good. She provides a lot of damage for the team that is basically game ending, and now that she has a CR push on her S2, it makes her a lot more reliable as a proc. So that's pretty good. LQC belongs in the mid tier, I think, unfortunately. I did make a video about it, but that's more of an anti-meta build than like a meta build, if I'm being honest. She has a few limitations where she has to be built really slow, so I think her tempo was too slow even for this slow meta, which is a lot to say, but she does have positive matchups, so she definitely is pickable, but she isn't a unit that I would necessarily use my ML5 selector for, if it makes sense. Emma Bologna, post buff, I think, will still be solidly above average. She's a decent bruiser. She has a lot of counterplay, but the matchup where she's good in, she's definitely a good pick into like these like slower matches or like into Candy and stuff. But I don't think she's like a meta defining unit or anything, just very usable. Maid similarly belongs in this tier. She's very balanced. She provides a lot of passive ER and recovery for the team with attack buff and revive, which is pretty nice, but she's countered pretty hard by units like this, Briar Witch Iceria or Ignore ER Soulburn, so she's definitely pickable, but not the best unit. ML Ken belongs in the solidly in the meta tier. He's pretty good at dealing with creatures of the meta like Aeufine and Navy Captain Landy, and he provides a lot of anchoring ability and anti-aggression, as well as like anti-meta builds where you can build him as a cleaver, but he's really good. Like, I would definitely recommend him. Hangai belongs at the top of the meta asterisk tier. He is still the best pure standard versus standard unit, but there's a lot of potential for people to pivot out into more aggression. Like if people would last pick like Monk plus Flitica, or people last pick Architect Leica plus Midnight Gala Lilius, Hankai doesn't do too much to stop them. So he needs like fair and honest gameplay, and a lot of Epic 7 will not give you fair and honest gameplay lately, unfortunately. Opposite goes into above average. She still is the best in her niche of one-shotting units through a barrier, but that's not always guaranteed, and there's a few caveats where, like for example, if you pick Airwolf with Navy Captain Landy, Opsig is not a guaranteed crit, so she's not the best pick. She's still usable, but not like super usable, if it makes sense. Pyro Captain Flan belongs in like the top end of above average. She's still pretty good. She has the potential to solo DPS a team, but you know, creatures like Abyssal Yafine cannot be controlled past a certain point. She dies to heavy aggression like Architect Leica or Cleave units, so she's just above average, pretty usable. Remnant Violet I'm gonna put in the meta asterisk tier, where he's a pretty good DPS plus DPS slash 1v4 type of unit. You just have to pick him into the right games where they don't have like the evasion counters and stuff. But he does counter a large part of the metagame, such as like Lionheart, Last Rider Crow, Bellion, May, like these type of teams that he's really good against. I'm gonna put Requiem Rowana in mid tier. There's a lot of immunity running around ever since last season, where basically everyone was Zeo Rowana cleaving, so her value has fallen off a lot, and a lot of these new units don't really care if they're turn increased. Like Landy, Abyssal Yafine don't really care. There's a lot of ways to tank this team, so she's pretty mid, but she can come back once immunity falls out of flavor. Ruel is mid. She's like a poor man's Destina, which is kind of weird to think about. She's definitely pickable into like these 1v4 protect the carry comps, but Destina kind of fulfills her niche a lot better nowadays, especially since she's able to AoE heal. But she's still pickable, so like I would solidly put her here. I would pick Sage Ball and Cezanne in the bottom of above average. He's definitely still pickable, but his matchups are a lot worse across the board. A lot of cleavers nowadays will pick up Abyssal Yafine or Politis to prevent CR manipulation, and he's really bad into these teams. And he also struggles against like Ray and Soulburn, which is still a problem. So he belongs in the above average tier. Silverblade Araminta, bottom of mediocre. She's pickable. Some people use her in cleaves as like a 250 effectiveness stun bot, but I think even in that niche she can get 15% in, so she's not like really reliable, but she does have a use, and like she sometimes sits in there. Solitaria unfortunately is in the middle of the meta tier right now. Because the meta is so slow, it is prime time for Solitaria to just terrorize teams by stun locking them. And even units like Edward, once you get overloaded once against Solitaria, it's all over because she's just gonna debuff you non-stop. So she belongs solidly in the meta tier, especially since she counters a lot of the counterplay. Like she counters all focus units, and they're sure to release more focus units in the future. So she solidly belongs in the meta tier. Spaz, another unusable unit. His niche is too specific and too unreliable for him to see any use ever. I think he needs like a full rework at this point. Stenny is actually in the middle of the must-have tier. She's kind of not as good in the meta right now thanks to these two units, and being weak to cleave, but she's still the best DPS in the game. Neutral but colder. Sky's the limit with her. Spirit Iceline also belongs at the bottom of the mid tier. She does have a very specific niche, but she's just not that good at it. And there's too many counters to her, like DPSs like Karina and Senya kind of destroy her, Veronica destroys her, AOL, Politis, they all have really good counters into her. And while you may see some people make her work in RTA, I think for most people, her use case is a little too niche. Strays goes in the middle of the meta asterisk tier. He's pretty good again now, since a lot of Airwells have moved on from Holy Sack. So the ability to just get rid of Mitt and make the game a 3v4 is always strong, but you know, he does have a few limitations where he can't be picked into more aggressive teams, and if the opponent does have Holy Sack, it's kind of a waste because you waste his very long cooldown that doesn't really provide any benefit. Sylvan Sage Vivian is gonna go in the middle of the mid tier. This unit has fallen off in a hard way due to all the new DPSs just kind of destroying her. Like Navy Captain Landy is good against her. Karina is good against her. And like even Abyssal Yafine does not have a terrible matchup into Sylvan Sage Rivian, because I basically, let's just say my Sylvan Sage Rivian got swallowed by an Abyssal Yafine one time, and it's just not great. And yeah, I think the meta is just not in a great place, and she is like, I think she just needs some buffs before she can get back into the meta. But quite unfortunate. Top model Luluka is at the bottom of mid tier. She's even worse than Closer Charles, because Closer Charles at least is uncounterable and he gets evasion, but top model Luluka has a non-attack skill, which is not the best thing in the meta right now, and she doesn't really have the damage to one-shot threats that you need to extinct, like Abyssal Yafine or whatever. So I think she needs another round of buffs, unfortunately. Twisted Eidolon Carrot ML Charon, I'm just gonna put in the above average tier. He's pretty good as an anchor, but he does have a lot of losing matchups, again, unfortunately. Like, he doesn't win against high effectiveness Salty, for example, Rylet, high effectiveness Faithless Litica. LRK can just tank his counters and then bike him eventually. So he's a decent anchor unit, but his use case is not, you know, as general. Zeo is going to be solidly in the meta tier. The ability to unconditionally contest for turn 1 is kind of strong, and he holds book, so like he's more seen in cleave nowadays than like anti-cleave, but people still do run their DPS Zeos, and it's like not a bad option. But yeah, here's the tier list. Again, these are just my opinions. I am just a humble one-time legend finisher, though I did ask a few people around, but we like generally settled on this list, I think, as a decent all-purpose RTA tier list for the ML5 selector. So just if I were to pick here, for example, I would pick like units that are higher up than the ones down. I have all the units in the first 3 tiers, so I'm probably stuck between LRK, Lionheart, or Martial Artist Ken. But I think I'm gonna pick Martial Artist Ken since I struggle against Abyssal Yafine, and like this matchup's not bad. But yeah, that's it for this week's video. I will have this tier list printed out and posted on my Discord if you want to see, but if you want to listen to the annotated explanation of why the units are here, here you go. Thanks, and I'll catch you next time.